Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Story number 1, The Third Truth, written by Glitchkey. I walked through the ship's end, blinking away the fog from the fault in the pressure system. I looked around, and the slightly flickering light, poorly secured cables, and worn deck plating spoke of a very old ship. A hand came down on my shoulder, and I spun around to face its source. He was tall and bulky enough I should have heard him coming from the other end of the pier. He grinned as he met my gaze. "Welcome aboard, Sprout. You're our new comms officer, right?" He chuckled as he gave me a once-over, reading me like a two-bit flimsy. "Fresh-pressed Academy uniform, too. Straight out of Academy, I bet." I nodded, then hoisted my pack up on my shoulder and started following as he turned and walked down the corridor. My eyes opened as the deck shook, power lines sparking and sirens waiting, like an army of mothers in beds too small, in rooms too empty. I rose, and everything went white for a moment. It felt like an ice pick had lodged itself to my spine. Smoke billowed through the decks like a party good enough to call the cops was just around the corner, and I looked at the flickering and cracked screens of the front of operations. It glowed crimson for a moment, and the deck shook again. The captain glanced over his shoulder to make sure that I was keeping up, then spoke again, the deep rumble of his voice reverberating off the bulkheads. "So, kid, what do they teach you about the forbidden band at the Academy?" I blinked. There wasn't any reason to think this was a trick question, but asking that has about as much point as asking why someone eats. "They say they're not to be used as comm frequencies on pain of death." "So they still don't teach you anything about it?" The captain turned long enough to wink at me before taking the next turn. "That's good to know." "But the captain held his hand up, and I stopped. No, it's true." A few turns and an elevator passed us silently, as an old ship can't make them, and then we were in operations. "So I've got something you need to learn. You see that switch right there on your comm console?" I looked, and there certainly was an odd switch, aftermarket and poorly hacked in, with the bright blue light harder to miss than the side of a mega freighter you're about to plow into. "Yeah?" I stared at the screen as the ships approached, their guns blazing and shields uncaring about whatever we used as a rebuttal. As smoke continued to fill the room, the blue glow of one of the consoles drew my attention for a moment, and I dragged myself towards it, inch by endless inch. The ship shook again, and the enemy shots finding their way more often than not. Elegant birds of prey crossed the screen in front of me, cats playing with the little mouse that they'd managed to pin to the ground. "That makeshift patch, or one like it, should be on every comm station you ever work." He tapped the station, then gestured vaguely towards the supplies along the rear bulkhead. "If it isn't, you'll need to know how to add one. It switches you over to the forbidden band." "Why were—" He started speaking again mid-sentence, his words short and clipped. "Because they didn't teach you anything about it." His eyes softened as he looked at me, a worn smile crossing his face like a dancer who should have retired long before. "And if you ever have occasion to broadcast on the forbidden band, you broadcast this file, and nothing else." His eyes hardened again as those last words. A wall that said that there was nothing to see behind it. "Nothing else. What's on the—" He held up his hand again and wagged a finger at me as he continued speaking. I'm getting there. It isn't much." He shrugged his shoulders, moving like they had the world to bear. "Just a few sounds, set to broadcast a loop. And no, I don't know what they mean." Looking away for a moment, he glanced at the forward view screen, and the endless distance between here and everywhere else. "Nobody this side of the starburst does, in fact." Crackling and flickering light filled the room as power failed and backups came online. Shadows danced along the walls like revelers with too much to drink, and cracks spiderwebbed across the part of the view screen, tapping what was there for a few moments longer than the rest. The shaking had stopped. The ships outside no longer firing. There's no point in gutting a fresh kill with a gun, after all. It ruins the flavor. But kid, that forbidden band is important. If life is good to you, you'll never have to use it. He turned to face away, his gaze locked on the crew stations and the people who weren't manning them. But if it isn't, well, if things gone sideways so wrong they can't be fixed. His voice lowered, and the wall spoke his words as much as the captain himself did. If you're looking death in the eyes, and those eyes look more friendly than what's left this side, that's when you use the forbidden band. I reached the console and flipped the bright blue switch hard enough to snap the end off. A few moments later, and I had the old file queued up and ready to send. As the ships turned and approached our airlocks, I dragged myself up to the consoles and leaned on the broadcast button, holding it down more with the weight than will. The captain turned to face me, his grimace hard enough to forge a good knife from red-hot steel. You don't use it before, and you certainly won't be able to use it after. As he continued to look at me, his eyes softened and a smile returned. But let me tell you, there are 3 truths in this galaxy. New ships appeared on screen, their guns firing dull blue and their shields at full glow. Some of the pirates died with the first salvo, but others turned, their scarlet shots ripping off at the new arrivals. Shot after shot, yet their aim was never true. Not once did they hit these unwelcome strangers, and not once did these new ships miss. First, death comes for everyone at some point. The view screen glowed bright as the ships began to die. Bursting like rotten fruit they were, flecks and sparkles of plasma glittering against the dark deeps behind them, more beautiful than they ever were as ships and crew. Second, taxes get paid no matter what it takes to pay them. The ships moved closer, desperate for a hit, and their aim was true, but the hits were not. As their crimson bolts of plasma splashed across the white shields of the interlopers, they faded and splashed on through the decks, bulkheads, and crew vanishing before the reforming behind the deadly blasts. Nothing could hit them, for there was nothing there to hit, and that nothing bore a grudge older than empires, one that burned brighter than the stars that no longer filled the sky around us. And third, nothing can touch the ghosts of terror. End of story. Story number 2. All the Nightmares Came Today, written by Doth Hath Depression. 1947. The Cold War begins. Humanity is divided once more. 1950. The Second Border Expansion Armada identifies Earth as hosting intelligent life and prepares for invasion. 2 months later, first contact is made along with demands of surrender and demilitarization. All major powers unanimously tell them to fuck off. War is declared, and 3 warships lay siege to America, Europe, and Russia. 1951. All 3 warships are successfully grounded through the use of heavy artillery and high-altitude bombing runs, as well as the use of 1 atom bomb, and are dismantled to be reverse-engineered. FOS, Federation of Sapiens, infantry are easily defeated due to human chemical propellant ballistics proving to be too powerful for their shields, as well as severe susceptibility to human psychological warfare and fear tactics. Mechanized units are also taken for study. Newly developed ground and orbital artillery now prevents any FOS warships from touching down, as well as retrofitted force fields and already existing civilian bunkers preventing orbital bombardment from halting the progress of the new warships. 1952. Combined scientific ventures of all major factions produce a basic armored spacesuit that utilizes a load-bearing exoskeleton to increase mobility and carrying capacity. This prototype is then used to create more specialized suits for the USA, the Commonwealth, and the Soviet Union. Psychological tests and captured aliens show the severe incapability to deal with stress or shock, leading to prioritization on tactics designed to exploit this. 1955. Sister ships of the USS Dreamer and HMS Champion are launched and engaged to edge of the FOS blockade. The blockade is forced to retreat after only being able to minutely damage the two ships. The USSR finally develops and launches the Stalingrad. Captured ships are returned to Earth for further fleet development. All three battleships form a defensive blockade until all armies can be outfitted with the new exosuits. 1957. The human armies are prepared for invasion. They set their FTL drives to the closest known FOS-occupied worlds. Outfitted in solid armored spacesuits, their soldiers cast glowing red eyes upon the heavens as they march towards battle. Veterans who manage to escape the chattering ballistic weapons and flame guns often speak of the humans' appearance on the worlds that they were garrisoned on, describing it as such. All the nightmares came that day. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.